New York City did not rise all at once. Its architecture is the result of centuries of ambition, migration, wealth, struggle, innovation, and power. Every building tells a story, and together those stories form one of the most dramatic architectural histories in the world. To understand New York's architecture is to understand how a small trading post evolved into a global capital of design, finance, and culture. The architectural story of New York begins long before skyscrapers, long before steel and glass, back when the land was home to the Lenape Native American tribe. They built seasonal structures using wood, bark, and natural materials, designed to live in harmony with the land. These structures left no towering monuments behind, but they established the first human relationship between people in this landscape. When European settlers arrived in the early 17th century, everything changed. In 1624, the Dutch established New Amsterdam at the southern tip of Manhattan. Early architecture was practical and defensive. Buildings were low, narrow, and constructed from wood and brick, influenced heavily by Dutch design. Steep gabled roofs, small windows, and thick walls were common. Streets were irregular and organic, shaped by foot traffic rather than planning. The city was compact, crowded, and focused on trade. Fort Amsterdam stood as the heart of the settlement, symbolizing protection and control rather than beauty. When the British took control in 1664 and renamed the city New York, architectural influences began to shift. Georgian architecture emerged, bringing symmetry, proportion, and classical details inspired by ancient Rome and Greece. Brick townhouses became more refined. Churches, government buildings, and wealthy residences reflected order and authority. Trinity Church became one of the earliest architectural landmarks, standing as both a religious and visual anchor for the growing city. By the late 18th century, after the American Revolution, New York was expanding rapidly. The city needed infrastructure, housing, and public buildings. Federal-style architecture took hold, characterized by simple elegance, balanced facades, and decorative elements like fanlights and columns. This period marked New York's transition from colonial town to American city. Buildings were still modest in height, rarely exceeding 4 or 5 stories, but ambition was already visible. The 19th century transformed New York forever. Immigration, industrialization, and commerce fueled explosive growth. In 1811, the Commissioner's Plan introduced the famous grid system, imposing order on Manhattan's landscape. This decision would shape the city's architecture more than any single event. The grid encouraged density, efficiency, and vertical expansion. Land became valuable and buildings began to rise. Greek Revival architecture dominated the early 1800s, reflecting America's admiration for democracy and classical ideals. Columns, pediments, and temple-like facades appeared across the city. Banks, courthouses, and public institutions adopted this style to project strength and permanence. At the same time, row houses multiplied, creating uniform streetscapes that still define neighborhoods like Brooklyn Heights and Harlem. As wealth increased, so did architectural ambition. The mid-19th century introduced Gothic revival, particularly in churches and universities. Pointed arches, ornate stonework, and vertical emphasis contrasted sharply with earlier styles. Trinity Church's 1846 Gothic redesign made it the tallest building in the city at the time, symbolizing how architecture was beginning to reach upward, not just outward. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the technological breakthroughs that made modern New York possible. Cast iron construction revolutionized building design. In neighborhoods like Soho, cast iron facades allowed for larger windows, lighter structures, and faster construction. These buildings were both functional and decorative, serving warehouses and factories while maintaining elegant street presence. This was one of the first moments when New York architecture balanced commerce with artistry. The late 19th century ushered in the age of the skyscraper. Steel frames, elevators, and electric lighting changed everything. Buildings no longer relied on thick walls to support weight, allowing them to climb higher than ever before. The home insurance building in Chicago may have started the skyscraper era, but New York perfected it. Competition for height became fierce, especially in lower Manhattan. Early skyscrapers borrowed heavily from European styles. The Flatiron Building, completed in 1902, blended Beaux-Arts elegance with modern engineering. Its triangular shape, dictated by the street grid, proved that architecture in New York was driven as much by constraints as creativity. Buildings like the Woolworth Building followed, combining Gothic ornamentation with unprecedented height. When it opened in 1913, it was the tallest building in the world, a cathedral of commerce that symbolized corporate power. The early 20th century marked the golden age of New York architecture. Art Deco emerged as the defining style of the era. Sleek lines, geometric patterns, and luxurious materials reflected optimism, speed, and modernity. The Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building became global icons, not just for their height, but for their elegance. These structures celebrated technology while maintaining artistic identity. They were statements of confidence during uncertain times, especially during the Great Depression. Zoning laws also shaped the skyline. The 1916 zoning resolution required buildings to step back as they rose, allowing light and air to reach the streets. This created the distinctive wedding cake silhouette seen in many early skyscrapers. Architecture was no longer just about private ambition. It was regulated for public welfare. After World War II, architecture in New York shifted dramatically. Modernism took over. Ornamentation was rejected in favor of simplicity, function, and efficiency. Glass curtain walls, steel frames, and minimalist forms defined the new skyline. Influenced by architects like Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, buildings became cleaner, lighter, and more corporate. The United Nations headquarters symbolized this global modernist approach, combining international ideals with New York scale. This period also saw the rise of massive housing projects. Designed to address overcrowding and poverty, many of these developments prioritized efficiency over community. While initially seen as progressive, some later became symbols of urban failure due to poor maintenance and social neglect. Architecture alone could not solve complex social problems, a lesson New York learned repeatedly. The 1960s and 1970s were turbulent years. Economic decline, crime, and urban decay left scars on the city. Many historic buildings were demolished, replaced with utilitarian structures that lacked character. However, this era also sparked preservation movements. The destruction of the original Penn Station in 1963 shocked the public and led to the creation of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. From that moment on, New York committed to protecting its architectural heritage. Postmodern architecture emerged as a reaction to modernism's cold simplicity. Architects reintroduced color, ornament, and historical references, often with irony. Buildings became expressive again, challenging strict functionalism. This period embraced diversity in style, reflecting the city's multicultural identity. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, New York entered another architectural renaissance. Global architects were invited to reshape the skyline. Glass towers grew taller and more sculptural. Sustainability became a priority. Green roofs, energy-efficient designs, and adaptive reuse projects transformed old factories into modern residences and cultural spaces. Projects like the High Line demonstrated how architecture could reconnect people with urban space. Once an abandoned railway, it became a public park that inspired development and innovation around it. Meanwhile, the reconstruction of the World Trade Center site became one of the most emotionally significant architectural projects in history. It balanced remembrance, resilience, and renewal, redefining how architecture can respond to tragedy. Today, New York's architecture is a layered narrative. Colonial brick buildings stand beside glass skyscrapers. Art Deco towers share space with ultra-thin luxury residences. Every era remains visible, coexisting rather than replacing one another. The city continues to evolve, driven by technology, climate concerns, and changing lifestyles. New York architecture is not just about buildings. It is about people, power, dreams, and survival. It reflects ambition, failure, reinvention, and hope. From wooden huts to steel giants, from narrow streets to vertical cities, New York's architecture tells the story of humanity pushing limits, adapting to change and shaping space to match its imagination. And as long as New York continues to grow, its architectural story will never truly be finished.